Today, I want to start off by simply talking about Meta Biden's book, African African Americans and Africa, chapter 5 and 6. He starts off by describing a story by Alexander Cornell and his trip to the country Liberia. In his terms of seeing this country, he was impressed with the beauty of the country, the ancestors, the culture, all the things that was consistent with what he thought as Black people should be immersed in. And so as he started writing and penning this description of Liberia, it started to invoke in himself to want to now become a citizen of that. Well, this type of thinking, this type of wanting to be free was very prominent in the 19th century. You had Blacks who, in African Americans particularly, who were in the United States, still enslaved in this 19th century era, and not until 1964 were they free. During this, what you find is a lot of Black people turning toward this Black nationalism movement. And the movement, or simply the definition that some people have invoked with Black nationalism, is simply the desire for African descent in the United States to unify politically, for us to come together. And so what you had is this divide in the culture among Black people who were either with Martin, who was a proponent of moving back to this experience of Liberia, who again became a free country in 1874. And then you had the David Walkers who looked at their connection at the Americas and said, this is where we need to be, but did not discount Africa, but didn't invoke people to want to go back. What you find is through this Black national movement, there was an era where Black people, Black missionaries particularly, were going back to Liberia to preach the gospel, to tell people of the good news of Christ. And so you had a lot of Black people during this time who took this notion of Black nationalism as they took the missionary trip over to Liberia, and was coming back and was provoking in others to either one, do the same trip, or two, go there in Liberia and live and pronounce Christ to them. You also then in the 20th century, what you did is you had a response of the challenges that were taking place. More and more Americas were looking like the Deep South. So now that the South is free, you still had the segregation laws, the Jim Crow era, now being pronounced in a lot of the areas in the United States. And so what you find is you've had a lot of people who are now going back to the era of when in 1864, when people were suggesting, hey, before 1864, when they were suggesting we should leave here free ourselves and go over to Liberia, now they're saying, we have these challenges that we're facing now with Jim Era. We might as well leave because we're not going to get our manhood here. Then what you find is you also had a lot of African people who were coming over and were studying in America. And they were studying here at universities and schools. And what they were doing was going back and teaching, getting what they had or what they learned, and then applying that in the different countries that they were in. In chapter 6, my motherland of the Negro people, you find there's this constant struggle between the Blacks in the 1900s all the way up into the 1910s, are saying, I don't know if I want to go back. I'm not sure if I do want to go back. So you had this kind of challenge going on. But what you also find is in the 1930s, 1920s rather, you find this Harlem Renaissance. And what this Harlem Renaissance begin to do is crystallize in Black people that not only are we Americans, but we also are descendants of the African people. So you see art, things like that, organization and resources are being going back to places like Ethiopia, like places like Liberia, because Ethiopia at that time was also a free state in Africa. And so you find this challenge in the 1920s, rather in 1930s, of people describing Africa in a more positive light. And then you also have people coming over as well, and then going back, and then some people coming, more and more Africans are actually coming and not going back to Africa. But what you have is this resources this resources that are going back to Liberia, going back to Ethiopia to crystallize a movement there that will better uplift their country. And then what you find is in the 1930s is this fight against imperialism. The African people were no longer satisfied with Europeans coming over and taking over their land and stealing their resources. So you find a lot of African Americans here in the United States taking all that they needed to do, all the things that they wanted to do in terms of uplift their people and sending those resources to Africa. So you had the W.E. Du Bois of the world, the Carter G. Woodsons of the world, writing and penning about Africa, their struggles, and also doing conferences to bring light to this issue as well. And then in the 1930s through the 1940s, there was this constant fight against, we need to end imperialism. We need to end that. And then he ends rather, chapter 5, with the snapshot of now people in 1950 are no longer fighting for imperialism, but now fighting for independent state. So these two chapters, what they do for us is they bring to light the relationship and the connection between Africa, not only Africa, but Africa and the African American people, and that connection that we have. You can't discount, you can't reject that you're just because you're here in America that you're not connected to Africa, because everything that came from it, everything that is about us is about here. So the struggle that we have here in the United States and the struggle they have there are all connected together. So they Meta rather just brings to light this story for us.